We're now going to start the main program with recitation of Qur'an.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ضرب الله مثلا للذين كفروا امرأة نوح وامرأة لوط كانتا تحت عبدين من عبادنا صالحين فخانتاهما فلم يغنيا عنهما من الله شيئا وقيل ادخلا النار مع الداخلين. وضرب الله مثلا للذين آمنوا امرأة فرعون إذ قالت رب ابن لي عندك بيتا في الجنة ونجني من فرعون وعمله ونجني من القوم الظالمين. ومريم ابنة عمران التي أحصنت فرجها فنفخنا فيه من روحنا وصدقت بكلمات ربها وكتبه وكانت من القانتين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Surah Tahrim, verses 10 to 12. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Allah sets forth an example for the disbelievers, the wife of Noah and the wife of Lot. Each was married to one of our righteous servants, yet betrayed them. So their husbands were of no benefit to them against Allah whatsoever. Both were told, enter the fire, along with the others. And Allah sets forth an example for the believers, the wife of Pharaoh, who prayed, my Lord, build me a house in paradise near you, deliver me from Pharaoh and his evil doing, and save me from the wrongdoing people. There is also the example of Mary, the daughter of Imran, who guarded her chastity, so we breathed into her womb through our angel Gabriel. She testified to the words of her Lord and his scriptures, and was one of the sincerely devout. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim.
Today again we're very fortunate to have Shaykh Zoheir Esmail, who will be continuing his series on Imam Husayn alayhi salam and spiritual intelligence. Let's welcome him with Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Shaykh Zoheir Esmail studied accounting and finance at the LSE before qualifying as a chartered accountant. Thereafter he began pursuing full-time studies in the Islamic Seminaries of Syria and London before moving to Qum, where he spent the last decade studying and teaching. He was awarded a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Exeter with his thesis. Salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بالحسين عليه السلام صلاة على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. So inshallah, to continue our topic of spiritual intelligence, we've spoken in some detail about spiritual intelligence, about what it means to have spiritual intelligence, and we've looked at the different riwayat. Although a quick look at the riwayat, obviously there is more depth to this topic. And now it's time to look at the opposite side. What is the opposite of intellecting? What is the opposite of comprehending and really understanding about religion, such that that understanding makes us to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to attain heaven? What is the opposite of that? Well, our riwayat give another characteristic which is opposed to the intellect. It actually makes it very easy for us, because a dichotomous relationship is given between two things: the intellect on one side and foolishness on the other side. And as they are both graded and related to each other, the more a person increases their intellect, the more they decrease their foolishness. Or the other word is also used, ignorance. The more they decrease their ignorance, al-jahl. And the more they increase in their ignorance, they decrease in their intellect. This is how it works. It is a relationship between two things that are graded and related to each other. So, looking at this reality of ignorance, ignorance is the lack of intellection. There's a hadith from Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, very important hadith, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, where he says, Sadiqu kulli imri'in aqluhu, that the friend of every person is their intellect. Wa'aduhu jahlu, and his enemy is his ignorance. Now, when we look at this hadith, we can see here that the intellect has been given a certain relationship to us, that of a friend. And a friend is somebody who is there for you, somebody who advises you, somebody who looks out for your benefit, somebody who tries to help you get to the path of your success. Whereas an enemy is the exact opposite. An enemy is somebody who tries to disrupt you, who tries to shake you, who tries to prevent you, and who tries to make sure that you are not successful. Be that because they are jealous of you, be that because they have some problem with you, or for any other reason. If you have ever had an enemy or ever had somebody who is out to see you fail, you will understand very well what an enemy is. An enemy is that kind of person who will not relent, will not stop until they see you flat on the ground. And enemies are not such that they are always apparent. And this is the thing about ignorance. Ignorance, more often than not, is not apparent to us, because it is the lack of intellection. It is something that remains behind. And as you will remember many other riwayat that you have seen as well about another enemy that you have. Another enemy that you have is your commanding self. Okay? So there are two enemies that are usually discussed. One is the commanding self and one is shaitan. So we will come back and we will discuss here how jahl or ignorance is related to the commanding self, and how this battle ensues between the intellect and the commanding self, and how one is an enemy and one is a friend. Now, there are so many parables within this riwayah. Sometimes what I do, if this riwayah is inside a class, I send this riwayah out and wait for the responses back to see how many things you can think of when it comes to what an enemy would do. What kind of strategies does an enemy have? An enemy will try and tell you that your friend is an enemy. Yeah? Your enemy will wait for the perfect moment to pounce. There are so many different strategies that enemies have in the art of war and also in day-to-day life that this riwayah is indicating towards. When these words are used, they are chosen. They are not just random words. صَدِيقُ كُلِّ امْرِئٍ عَقْلُهُ وَعَدُوُّهُ جَهْلُهُ. On the surface, it seems like such an easy and straightforward riwayah. But when we take this down to our own psychology and start to actually think about our own psychology, once we understand what our ignorance is, because our thoughts and actions reveal to us where our ignorance is. When we find ourselves being pulled towards a sin, finding some kind of pleasure in that sin, that's from ignorance. When we find a kind of satisfaction from dominating somebody else, that is a kind of ignorance. There are many times in our lives, sometimes even small indications here and there, where our ignorance makes itself clear to us. And this is why one of the principles of purifying the self is to be aware of the self, to have this situation which is called muraqabah. Muraqabah means to be looking over yourself, to see all of these slips, because your enemy, while he's hiding, he can't help bearing his face, because just like somebody with enmity, they can't always remain in the background, they can't always wait. So this riwayah, if you just take this riwayah and work with it, know that there is an aspect inside you that is your spiritual intelligence. That is your friend. First of all, you have to identify who that friend is, and then to start listening to it. Listen to that spiritual friend. Then also recognize our own pulls within us, our own aspects that pull us away from the journey that we need to take. Make us concentrate on this world rather than the next. Make us to prioritize this world rather than the next. And of course, it's not always so clear, but when it is clear, when it is clear for us, then we can use that to try and readdress this balance, because a human being will sit with one of these two predominantly. Like you saw in the riwayat, for all believers, they have junud of the aql, they have aspects of the intellect, and they have the intellect, because obviously if they had no intellect, they would have no deen, and if they had no deen, they would not go to heaven. So they all have something, and they all have something that they're also working on, something that they're trying to bypass, so that they can increase in their level of intellect. So if I just link this hadith straight away to our ethical tradition. Our ethical tradition, when it talks about this kind of psychology between ignorance and the intellect, also uses the intellect as the friend of a human being. But it breaks down ignorance into three things. The first is desire, our desires. Desire is a pulling force. Okay? When you desire something, you desire to have that thing. That is what desire is. You desire for something, you want something. It's a pulling force. You want to bring that thing towards you, and sometimes when desire is out of control, it is at any cost to pull that thing to you. The second thing that is discussed is anger. Anger is a pushing force. You push away that which you perceive to be of danger to you. Okay? And again, when that is out of balance, then you have problematic issues. But at the same time, both desire and anger are not completely, completely bad. If we didn't desire anything, we would never pull any benefit towards ourselves. And if we never pushed away any harm, then we would be a pushover. Okay? We wouldn't, for example, when it comes to protecting your children comes out of anger. That is why sometimes you will find that your child is about to cross the road and you'll shout at them. Okay? And you feel an anger inside you. That anger is a form of protection of something that would be bad that would come to your child, a pushing force against that. So these two, desire and anger, these are your base pulls. A pulling force and a pushing force. Okay, these are the two things that are going on inside. But then there's a multiplication force. The multiplication force is the imagination. Okay? When you sit at home and you let your imagination run on your desire or on your anger, you can create things and situations that don't exist. And you feel, honestly and truly, you feel the desire and the anger as if it is real. Okay? Now again, imagination is a very important faculty on the positive side. Without our imaginations, we cannot be creative. Without our imaginations, we can't even remember the way home. Because when you remember the way home, you have stored that in your mind, and you remember when you come to the lights, do I turn left, do I turn right? This is to do with your imaginative faculty. It's not to do with your desire or your anger. It's to do with your imagination. But if imagination is out of balance and out of control, it can cause huge problems. And it is the imagination that is the biggest threat to the kingdom of the internal kingdom. Because from our imaginations we construct our ego, our sense of self. Okay? With that imagination we construct our ego, and our ego is the hardest thing that we have to burn through in order to get down to our true selves. The image of ourself is something that prevents us from really knowing who we are. The image of our independence prevents us from understanding our need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The image of our independence stops us from knowing how dependent we are on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is, if you like, the crux of the ego. The crux of the ego is to make you have a view of yourself which is not real. The reality is something else. And the journey is to break through that ego that has been constructed over a period of time. Because they also mentioned that the first of these faculties to enter a human being is desire. As soon as a baby is born, they are pulling benefits towards themselves. Benefit of comfort, benefit of milk, and all other benefits. Then, all of you will know about terrible twos, horrible fours. This is where anger. All of a sudden, anger is the solution to get what you want, push away what you don't want. And then as the child develops, their imagination comes in, where they love storytelling, they love to imagine situations, 1,000 ice creams, you can play with them how much you love them and give them a whole story to use their imagination and to improve their imagination. So what happens is that these faculties are rooted before the arrival of the intellect. The intellect arrives late. And when the intellect arrives, it finds the kingdom completely overrun. The ego is already formed. The repetitive, angry actions have already occurred. The desires have already become rooted. And then when the intellect arrives, these three faculties go on a major offensive. and that is adolescence. Okay? They go on a major offensive, because now, before the intellect arrived, the kingdom was theirs. Now, with the intellect there, now it's time to fight for the kingdom. And during this time, our personality becomes constructed, and we are kind of, pushed along life and prioritize other things and so on and so forth. And we become adults with these forces that haven't really solved themselves yet. And then as we mature, we realize we need to develop our personalities. We need to become, more spiritual. And then we start to look back. So this is one of the schemas that is given for us to understand what this ignorance is. This ignorance is a movement of these three factors. And these three factors are to make it simple for us, so that when we look at ourselves and when we examine what is going on within us, we can tell from these three things. Another schema that you will have heard of is the three selves. So you have the commanding self, you have the blaming self, and then you have the self that is at rest. So the commanding self is your base desires, your desires, your anger, your desire. But the perspective from which this schema is coming from is to tell you that your commanding self is something that doesn't relent. It keeps commanding you. It keeps telling you to do it. Okay? And the interesting thing about this schema is that it tells you that the thing commanding you is you, your commanding self. It's you. Yeah? It's not somebody else. Your own self is commanding. Okay? So within yourself, you have this aspect that is pushing you. Okay? So this is what is in your mind. This is what you think. Okay? And this is why you believe it's you. You think like this. And then you have the blaming self. The blaming self is like a conscience. Okay? The blaming self tells you, don't do it. Stop. Don't do it. Okay? And then ensues a battle between these two. There is something pushing you one way and another aspect of your own self pushing you another way. And then a battle ensues between these two, the commanding self and the blaming self. The commanding self and the blaming self. But what happens eventually if somebody is successful is that the blaming self dominates the commanding self, such that the commanding self stops speaking. It stops commanding. Because it has been pushed down so far, it stops commanding. And when that happens, then you have a soul that's at rest. Why? Because these two aspects are no longer fighting. Okay? And this fight all happens or is all witnessed in the mind. Okay? So we have more than one level. Our physical level, where we act. We have our mind, which we all know. Things are going on in the mind. And then we have our other metaphysical levels. Okay? So our personality is hidden behind our mind. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Somebody who's generous, the thought comes to their mind to give. Okay? The generosity is a trait that they have in their personality. The place where you can see the manifestation of what is going on is in the mind, and then you have the action. Okay? But otherwise, everything else is occurring in the mind. So when you hear of the battle with the self, that is a battle within your mind. It is a battle to make sure that your intellect dominates your own ignorance. But you need to be aware of your own ignorance. So let me also explain some of the necessary offshoots of ignorance. Okay? And I have all of these things to a certain level, and everybody has to look at themselves and see what they have of this to a certain level. Because if we don't have any of these, then we are prophets or imams or those people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested for iman, as you remember. Okay? So the first offshoot of ignorance is disbelief. Disbelief comes from ignorance. The next thing is to fight and to deny what you know to be true. Okay, to fight and deny what you know to be true. The next aspect is to despair. Despair comes from ignorance. Okay? The next thing is to act unjustly. And of course, justice is something that is very difficult to attain, and acting unjustly when you're in the position to dispense justice comes from ignorance. Okay? The next thing is to be ungrateful. Okay? Gratefulness comes from understanding, and ungratefulness comes from ignorance. The next thing is to be covetous, to see something and to want that for yourself while it is in somebody else's hand. Then greed. Then the hardness of the heart, where you don't feel merciful and sensitive towards other people. Then anger. Then, of course, ignorance. Ignorance here as opposed to knowledge. The next one, being shameless. The next one, desires. Harshness, audacity, arrogance, haste. So when you can't be patient for something to happen and you rush into it, this is from ignorance. Impatience, contempt, doubt, grief, vengeance, poverty, heedlessness, forgetfulness, severing ties where the ties should be built, greed, refusing to give charity, enmity, treachery, disobedience, arrogance, tribulation, hatred, wrong, right and wrong. You are wrong when you're ignorant. Being irresponsible, dullness, idiocy, failure to recognize, hostility, disclosure of other people's secrets. Not praying comes from ignorance. Not fasting comes from ignorance. Being a coward comes from ignorance. Breaking God's covenant, wickedness, ostentation, evil, coming out and exhibiting yourself, being filthy, indecent, to go into excess, fatigue, tribulation, hoarding, desire, flippancy, misery, persistence in doing sins, being deceived, disdain, haughtiness, laziness, exultance, aloofness, and miserliness. These are some of the natural consequences that come out of being ignorant. And of course, the positive traits are natural traits that come out of intellection. So, let me ask you a question. If you were to advise people how to improve themselves, how would you advise them to do it? Would you ask them to look at each and every one of these traits and to see within themselves if they have it, and then work on those traits one by one? That is how our ethical tradition has gone about advising people. They have said that, look inside yourself. If you see you have an issue, then take that issue and deal with it. And sometimes you have stories of certain people that they'll say, after 70 years I have been battling with this fault, I have now overcome it, and now, inshallah, to the next, however many faults are left. But this is a very long way. It's a very long way of doing it. Just like if you're trying to prune or trying to take down a tree, okay? You can take down the tree by cutting off each branch one by one. Or if you're trying to unload a lorry, you can unload a lorry one box at a time. Unload it one box at a time. It will take you can trust me, it will take you a very, very long time. Okay? But there's another way, and that is what these riwayat are driving at. There's another way of doing it. If you increase your intellect, all of the moral traits will increase. And if you reduce your ignorance, all of those traits that are related to ignorance will also decrease. This is like uprooting the tree. If you uproot the tree, you don't have to worry about the branches. You've uprooted the tree. And if you unload your load with pallets, then you don't have to worry about that either. But unfortunately, this is not the case for most people. As Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says, كَم مِّن أَقْلٍ أَسِيرٍ تَحْتَ هَوًى أَمِيرٍ. How many intellects are prisoners under the desires that are the overcomer, if you like, are the one that is dominating. But at the same time, like I mentioned before, the Imams, they sought to solve the problems of their society using a spiritual solution. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in his khutbahs, he gives a couple of extremely important advices for those who want to start dealing with these issues. The first thing is the remembrance of death. The remembrance of death puts life into perspective. When life is put into perspective, the movement to spiritual intelligence is all the more intense. Okay, so this is the first thing. If you want to remember that, that's the first thing. The second thing is that Amir al-Mu'mineen, in some of his khutbahs in Nahj al-Balagha, he mentions two things. Two things that he said he was fearful for the ummah. That if they don't sort these two things out, then of course it will lead to their spiritual perdition. The first is following your desires. So when you know that you are acting in ignorance, don't do it. Don't follow it. Stop yourself before you do it. And the second thing Amir al-Mu'mineen said is to have long hopes. Long hopes, or طول الأمل. طول الأمل means that you put your hope in things that will not occur. Okay? Like, for example, if you take Umar ibn Sa'd, he had طول الأمل, very clear example. What did he want? What was the thing that pushed him to be the governor of Ray? Yeah, that is long aspirations, aspirations that are far. And long aspirations make you forget about death, because you're chasing that aspiration and you forget about the difficulty of what lies ahead. So this is just in summary. Of course, again, when it comes to ignorance, there's a lot more to say. And inshallah, hopefully tomorrow we'll speak a little bit more now from a Quranic perspective. And inshallah, we'll try and pull together what we've said in these few nights, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
Any questions from either side? And if you have questions online, please do send them in as well.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much for your series. Actually, I found it really enlightening. So, thanks for taking the time, and I'm sure a lot of preparation. Most people, if you ask them, how do I fight ignorance, they would say, well, read, gain knowledge. But that wasn't your answer. Why isn't it gain knowledge?
Okay, it's a good question. It is gaining knowledge, but like I said in the beginning, there's a difference between gaining information and gaining knowledge. Gaining knowledge is that thing which causes you to change. Okay, I'll give you an example. Say you're a person who generally has not had many problems in life. One day you go to a place where there is extreme poverty, and you see for yourself the way people are living. After that experience, you can't live the way you were living, because now you have seen that people don't live like this. People have difficulty. And what that will do is it will induce a meaningful change within you. Okay? It will change your personality. Yeah? It will change your personality such that that kind of life that you were living not concerned becomes a life of concern. So in the same way, the scriptural knowledge is to have this effect. The knowledge of Tawheed should push you to become a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The knowledge of your dependence on Him should push you to become humble. Okay? This is what it is meant by knowledge. That yes, ignorance is pushed aside with knowledge. Ignorance is pushed aside by intellection. Intellection, firstly within the natural disposition of the human being, and then secondly from what the holy guides come and guide us to understand. And they have made the path such that there are things we can do mindlessly to help us as well. Okay, so our ibadat, for example, okay, they are things that are there to help us to build a capacity and a propensity. Okay, now you can do them mindlessly and they will help. But if you do them consciously and if you do them with the sincerity that is involved and the spirit that is involved in them, then they will increase your capacity to understand. And this is why Salatul Layl, for example, is one of those worships that has been extremely encouraged, because with that your capacity increases manifold to comprehend, to understand. And then the other things like, for example, the remembrance of death. Remembrance of death, we're supposed to remember death all the time. Okay? And that can occur in the state rather than trying to... Sometimes I say this is like click and refresh. Sometimes we try and remember Allah, for example, with click and refresh. Remember, click and refresh. Same thing with death as well. But that's not what it is. It is a state. It is a state that a human being has where, because they realize how fragile life is, they are always in remembrance of death. Yeah. So yes, it is knowledge, but knowledge like this.
Any questions from either side? Final questions?
In this part of the lecture tonight, I want to have an examination of the tents of Imam Husayn alayhi salam and their involvement throughout the day of Ashura and the night before. When Imam Husayn reached Karbala, he decided to stop at a place that would be protected from the back. So he stopped at a place where there were lots of reeds that formed a natural barrier between him and anybody who would try and attack from behind. And then on the night of Ashura, the Imam ordered two very important things. Number one, he ordered a trench to be built behind the tents, and probably in a kind of semicircle. And he ordered for reeds and other things to be put inside so that that trench could be lit on fire. And then he ordered for the tents to come close together, very close together, such that there was no possibility of somebody being able to get through the tents. And those tents were formed in a semicircle with the tents of the Ashab on the outside and the tents of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam surrounded by those tents. And Imam Husayn alayhi salam on the day of Ashura, he also had groups of 3 or 4 companions were stationed at certain points within the tents. And all of this strategy was because if the camp of Imam Husayn had been attacked from all sides, then the day of Ashura would have finished very quickly. Because when you are surrounded by all sides, obviously you cannot defend anything. So the way the tents were positioned was such that they were in a semicircle. And the women of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam on the day of Ashura, they would have been in the center. of those tents, because that was where the most protection was. But at the same time as that being the area of the most protection, because of this strategy, what is clear is that the battle happened right outside of the tents. When you hear that Imam Husayn, for example, took the body of one of his family members and dragged it back to the tents, it was not long or far, because what was happening right in front of everybody. Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when he was constructing this strategy, was trying to make it such that his life could be protected and his women could be protected. And as the day went on, the ashab played a very large role in doing that. As the day went on, most of the time was with the battle with the ashab. But when it came to the time of the Ahlul Bayt, what they say is that it was no longer a battle. It was more like a slaughter. When you hear each night, this personality, that personality, all of this happened within an hour or something like that. It was a slaughter. And the slaughter was right in front of the women and the children. The children were not just calm seeing their family members slaughtered. If any of you has ever been with a child, children are not like that. They would run out of the tents. They would cause a commotion in the tents. The women, when they saw their family members, they were not calm. It was an ordeal in front of the tents, until Imam Husayn alayhi salam was the last man standing. And everybody was there to protect him, but he was the last man standing. And there was nothing that anybody could do. There was nothing that could be done, except that the Imam alayhi afdalus salatu wasalam was martyred. And it was well known what would happen after his martyrdom. The enemies, they came for the tents. They came for the women. They came to take what they could, and they came to leave them destitute. In Tariq al-Tabari, quoting Abu Mikhnaf, he says that the enemy began to loot the personal possessions, garments, and the camels of the Imam. Then they directed themselves to plunder the women folk of Al-Husayn and their goods and their provisions. There was no woman spared until they had successfully snatched the robe from her back, forcefully depriving her and carrying it away. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. صلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. I learnt from Husayn how to be wronged and be a winner. I learnt from Husayn how to attain victory while being oppressed. Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shaheed al-Shaheed al-Husayn Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shaheed al-Shaheed al-Husayn. You are the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad Mustafa, the son of Imam Ali and Lady Fatima, the purest of souls with utmost purity. Yet thousands of so-called Muslims showed no loyalty. They knew you entered the holy cloak by the will of Allah. Yet shroudless they left you on the plains of Karbala. Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn, Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn. You are the teacher of sacrifice and of charity. You even fed the horses of your enemies. From darkness into light you set Hur free. For surely he entered heaven with your mother's handkerchief. But when you pleaded for mighty Asghar, who was just thirsty, an arrow is what they fed to your infant baby. Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn, Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn. You are the lantern of guidance for all the world to see, the ark of salvation for all of humanity. Those who fought you in your light called out your name. In your arms you carried them back till only you remained. Sakina, your daughter, went from crying in your arms to seeing your head on a spear in the court of Sham. Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn, Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn. You are the root of the branch, that sweet Zainul Abidin, a branch that weakened with what his eyes had seen. He endured the scene of Karbala and held his belief. Added to his own suffering, no sign of his relief. The sight of women and children tied in chains, and hearing Zainab cry in pain, "Where are you, O Husayn? Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, al-Husayn, Husayn al-Shaheed, al-Shaheed al-Husayn, Husayn al-Gharib, al-Gharib, الحسين حسين الشهيد الشهيد الحسين. No Qasim, no Aun, no Muhammad, no Abbas, no Akbar, no Asghar, you lost them all so fast. Oh Allah, please accept this humble sacrifice. These were the words of our Imam when Asr time arrived. Oh Allah, what has he lost, he who loses you? But oh Allah, what can he lose, he who finds you? Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shahid al-Shahid al-Husayn Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shahid al-Shahid al-Husayn. You are the savior of Islam, and our faith you did revive. Today we call Ya Mahdi, without him we are deprived. For surely he grieves over tortured beloved. And when we lament the trials faced by Masa'ib, Ya Mahdi, tonight we vow and we grieve with you. In the light of Al-Husayn, together we'll fight for truth. Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shahid al-Shahid al-Husayn Husayn al-Gharib al-Gharib al-Husayn Husayn al-Shahid al-Shahid al-Husayn. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا نبي الله. السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وصي رسول رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى بضعتك الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى زوجتك الوفية الغراء خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ولديك الإمامين الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى أئمة المسلمين من ذرية ولدك الحسين علي السجاد ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد الجواد وعلي الهادي والحسن العسكري والحجة ابن الحسن المهدي. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.